All right, let's go ahead and begin. As we were talking a few moments ago, I think this lesson is going to be outstanding. Certainly the principles of this lesson are very good for all of us to understand, and certainly it's biblical, the process of restoration and reconciliation with someone. I started out by asking the idea of what is confrontation. Well, an actual definition is when two hostile parties meet face to face to air their differences. And the truth of that is there's always emotion involved. Sometimes it can result in good outcomes, sometimes not so good. But confrontation is a difficult thing. And it's difficult in our Christian life. But that's what this story is all about, and it illustrates very vividly how we can come to a best conclusion, potentially. Not all the time that we seek reconciliation and restoration does it come out that way. But it is still incumbent upon Christians to seek forgiveness and to initiate that effort at reconciliation. So the story, of course, is in chapter 33 of Genesis, but we looked at the fact that in chapter 32, Jacob had a confrontation in our lesson today, and it was with this messenger from God who ultimately will result in Jacob walking with a limp for the rest of his life and also being called Israel. But after 20 years now, Jacob has to confront what he's really feared confronting all along, and that was Esau, with no knowledge of how Esau was going to respond. Jacob's changed, though. He was the devious scoundrel, the schemer that we know when he left. Esau has no knowledge of that change. But Jacob knows that God had called him back to this country, that he had the children that would result in the nation being built, and he believed God that he was going to be used of God. So his belief in his heart was that this had to be resolved. And so that's what we're going to look at today with the big idea. Reconciled relationships are a blessing from God, with the greatest blessing being a restored relationship for him, with him. And so in Genesis 33, 1 to 15, we see these principles I think we can glean from the story that are still applicable for our life. The first, and it always is true in an effort of reconciling with a wayward brother or someone that you are distant from, there always is a request or a need for forgiveness, but forgiveness is always accomplished with a humble spirit. We can just see it all the way through the scriptures, that a person has to humble themselves in order for God to reward this kind of restoration. So that's the first thought. We have to put away our pride. And in verses 1 to 4, Jacob, he's no doubt in a position where he can see Esau and his 400 men coming. They're probably in a cloud of dust, right? And so Jason mentioned it earlier, but in chapter 32, Jacob's plan was to divide the two groups into two separate groups, separate the two groups, and if Esau attacked one of the groups, perhaps the other would escape. But here in chapter 33, he does a different plan. And that is, he sends these gifts with each grouping that he sends to Esau. And again, it would be the height of cowardice if Jacob had sent his family ahead of him in these stages with gifts, and he himself had been at the back. But in an effort truly to be reconciled, Jacob, now Israel, takes the initiative, and he goes straight to the front. And it is in that circumstance that we see God reward his desire to be reconciled with Esau. How did Jacob demonstrate his humility?
Bowing.
Okay, good. Again, it's very, very clear that Jacob he shows his sincerity by prostrating himself before Esau, bowing down. How many times did he do it? 7 times. If you've read the notes, you'll see that I did include a note, which I thought was a pretty profound implication. But for someone to bow down 7 times was a gesture of humbleness, usually reserved for foreign kings. And so for Jacob to respond this way to Esau, and the idea is he prostrated himself, then may have come a little closer, bowed down again, prostrated himself, come a little closer, and it was in this incremental stages that he's coming to meet his brother.
And between each bow, kind of peeked.
He wondered what's happening, yeah. But the reality of this humility is that Jacob is showing his sincerity that he really does want to be restored back into relationship with his estranged brother. And he knows he's the one responsible for it. And so he is looking to reconcile and have this transformation take place with his brother. And he starts it by approaching him with humility. And it's the same thing that must take place in a Christian's life. We have to approach others with humility if we ever hope to desire to get things right between us. And then I asked the question still at that point of Esau's reaction seems a little bit surprising. And what was it? Yeah. What a great thing. I think all of us that have been in Christian work for a while, we understand again how serious and how difficult confrontation can be. But have you had those moments like I have where you worried about that, you fretted about it, you agonized over the meeting, only to have their heart as prepared by God as your heart is? Absolutely. And when you come together and both exercise humility, it is a wonderful reunion. And that's what we have this story of. And I included the example from Luke 15 that we're all familiar with about the prodigal. And it's a similar story as far as the father joyously running to his estranged son and falling on his neck and kissing him repeatedly. And that's this kind of idea that's going on here with Esau. So happy that... now, what do you think the reason was Esau brought 400 men with him?
To escort them into...
You know, yeah, Mike, thought?
He didn't know what kind of group that Jacob was coming.
Yeah, that's my implication thought too, is Esau didn't know what to expect. Jacob's back after 20 years. Maybe he has an army in tow. And so clearly Esau was preparing for the worst. Turns out that everything worked out for the best, okay? So the idea of being genuine is another part of true reconciliation. You have to be able to transparently reveal your heart that you really, really want this to happen. Again, it starts with humility, but it also starts with genuineness. So what's the idea about Jacob giving up some of his flocks to Esau? Why did he do that?
You've been blessed.
Okay, very good.
And he'd also stolen blessing from Esau. So,
Okay.
yeah.
But isn't it true, though, that just this act of contrition revealed to Esau, hey, I don't want anything out of this. I'm not looking to benefit from this. I genuinely want you to receive these gifts from my hand. I have no alternative motive here.
They didn't have gift cards back then.
Yeah.
They did not. Otherwise, it would have looked a lot like Cheddar's or Outback. But
There was a lot of
the
beef.
truth of the matter is, Jacob recognized he had been blessed by God, and he was at this point prepared to share his blessing with his brother. And again, it spoke to the issue that I am not hoping to gain from this relationship. In fact, please accept my gifts. You'll remember Esau said, no, I don't want any of this. God has prospered me. I also am very wealthy and have many flocks. And yet Jacob said, please, I just insist. I don't want there to be any question that I am trying to gain from this thing. I want you to please accept my presence. And ultimately, Esau accepted the gifts and just recognized it as a magnanimous gift and applauded Jacob for it. Okay? I asked the question, what spiritual characteristics do you see in Jacob in verse 11? And I don't know if any of you have that open. Jason, you have it right there. What's chapter 33:11? Oh, you're not in Genesis, are you? Okay.
Take, I pray thee, my blessings that is brought to thee, because God hath dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. And he urged him, and he took it.
Okay, good. That idea of pressing upon him to take them. But what's different in Jacob's character here?
A complete reversal, because he stole his birthright for a bowl of soup.
He was a cheater and a deceiver
Yeah,
before.
and
then
totally
he's
greedy.
a giver.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, the character change that Esau saw in Jacob was so apparent.
Yeah.
This is not the brother I knew 20 years ago. And so he accepted the gift, but he understood that the gifts had been, as Jacob acknowledged, God's blessed me. Here, I want to share this with you.
Jacob
But-
wouldn't even give him a bowl of stew
Without trading it.
without trading.
There you
something.
go.
Yeah.
And
There you
now
go.
he's freely giving.
Yeah. And so, again, this speaks to the issue of no greed, no ulterior motive, and indeed, he wanted to do this act and recognize that God had blessed him. All right. Then there's an attitude here of contentment. And I just make a passing comment about that. But Jacob says, God has given me so much. Here, take these things. It's not a problem. I am content with what God has given me. And that is another character quality that we'd never seen in Jacob before until he had gone through some of these challenges in his life. But that is also a great recognition on the part of believers to reach a point of contentment. So often, even good, kind, God-honoring Christians a lot of times still just aren't content. And yet I referenced 1 Timothy 6:6, which I found to be such a powerful verse over the years. And it says, godliness with contentment is great gain. You know, people want to seek after riches. That's one of the things they're often discontented about. But godliness with contentment is great gain. Okay? And then I'll just touch on this. We do have to leave, but they agreed upon limits, which I thought was an interesting thing, because you'll remember Esau said, come with me, your whole group, come with me, we'll live together. And Jacob kindly says, no, we're going to live apart. Now, they reach terms of agreement where they part in a very, very good way. But sometimes those are wise decisions that you make after you've been reconciled. And Jacob and Esau both would have known about what happened with their grandfather, Abraham, and their great uncle Lot. Remember, they had lived together and with big herds and flocks, and they couldn't be together. And the inference is Jacob recognizes there needs to be a little bit of distance so that we're not together where aggravations reoccur. And so that does take place later on. We see them reconciled together when they come back to bury their dad Isaac. And everything seems to be really, really wholesome in that relationship.
Do you think part of it was Jacob was not quite 100% sure? Esau had
I think that maybe he wonders if Esau is as committed to God as he is. And so, yeah, there probably were some wise boundaries placed there just to ensure that there not be frictions. That's kind of how I've taken it. Okay. All right. Well, our time's up. I think you'll have a great lesson with this.